Hey, Jameel. Excuse me, I'd like to encourage everyone to take a seat. We'd like to go ahead and get started. Good morning and welcome. I'm Lisa Hamilton, Vice President of External Affairs at the Annie E. Casey Foundation. Welcome to our Youth and Work Policy Forum, where we will discuss the findings and recommendations from our second Kids Count Policy Report of 2012, entitled Youth and Work, Restoring Teen and Young Adult Connections to Opportunity. This morning is the culmination of many months of research and analysis on the challenges facing a generation of young people and how we can help connect them to opportunity. The report recognizes that older teens and young adults who are not in school and not employed need pathways to work experience and skill development, which are essential to their becoming successful adults. We thank many of you here today for your feedback and advice as we developed this report. We are pleased to offer our perspective on the growing national conversation about how to encourage a stronger generation of America's next workers. Together with our network of Kids Count state grantees, we are striving to build on the evidence of what works for youth and how to scale up policies and programs that provide pathways to education and successful careers. Over the next 2 hours, we'll hear from our country's top thought leaders from the business, philanthropic, and community sectors on how young people can develop the work skills and experience that lead to long-term success and financial stability. And we'll hear the voices of youth in a short video that highlights how innovative programs can move this next generation toward greater opportunities in the workplace. We've got a number of young people with us today, and we're also looking forward to hearing their questions and perspectives on this topic. As we begin, there are a few thank yous we'd like to offer. First, to the Knight Conference Center at the museum for this wonderful venue for today's gathering. We'd also like to thank our co-hosts for the event that include the Youth Transition Funders Group, Aspen Forum for Community Solutions, Corporate Voices for Working Families, the Forum for Youth Investment, Opportunity Nation, United Way Worldwide, and Jim Casey Youth Opportunities Initiative. Today's event is being live cast and will be available online at aecf.org/kidscount/youthwork. And if you're tweeting about today's event, we hope you'll use the hashtag YouthWork. Now, to talk about why this topic is so important, let me introduce a leader who has committed his career to help improve the lives of young people, Patrick McCarthy, the President and CEO of the Annie E. Casey Foundation.
Good morning. Remember your first job? You remember the first time that you were expected to show up on time and to follow directions and to get along with people who were sometimes not so easy to get along with? Remember the first time you were asked to figure things out on your own? People counted on you? Even more important, do you remember your first full-time jobs? The jobs where you were counting on that paycheck to make your first rent, to buy your own clothes, to make your way in the world. Well, most of us do remember those first couple of jobs. And we also remember how much we learned about the real world on those first couple of jobs. We also learned so much just by messing up over and over and over again and finding out that if you do that, you actually can survive. So you build a little bit of a tough skin, right? Most of us can probably look back now and remember those first few jobs as the building blocks, the very foundation of our entire careers. We can remember how important they were in shaping who we are today, in giving some sense of confidence, some sense of independence, some self-reliance, and all that comes with the pride of earning a paycheck. Odds are that most of the folks in this room had an extended period of formal education beyond high school. And even so, those first jobs were every bit as important as any class that we took in college or graduate school. But for lots of our peers, lots of our friends who didn't go on to college or technical training, those early jobs were even more important. They were the opportunity to learn real skills and to put themselves on a path towards decent pay, enough to do right by one's family, a path towards reasonable security, all so important to take care of a family. Generally speaking, we went through those earliest experiences at a critical time in our lives, between the ages of about 16 and about 24. This is a time not only of very critical changes in what's expected of us and what we learn to do socially and how we start to learn how to take care of ourselves. It's also, turns out, the more research we now have, it's a critical time in terms of the very development of our brains. The very architecture of our brains are going through multiple changes during this period of time. This is the period of time when we start to form the habits and the values and the expectations that will last a lifetime and that will pass on to our own children. And yet, a great many of us in this room would not have had those opportunities if we were between 16 and 24 today. That opportunity to get work experience and learn how to survive and thrive in the real world. If we were looking for our first jobs today, we'd face a much tougher future. Overall employment among young people today is at its lowest point since the early 50s. And over the last 10 years, it has dropped sharply. Now, we all know from economists that there have been fundamental shifts in the U.S. economy. In fact, in the world economy, we know that increased productivity driven by automation and computers has affected the job market, the loss of manufacturing jobs, the rise of the globalized, knowledge-based economy, the need for a higher set of skills. All of these have hit older teens and young adults very hard. Nearly 6.5 million young people, 6.5 million young people are neither in school nor are they attached to the workforce. And this is why the Casey Foundation has decided to release the report that you have before you today, to bring attention to what we think is actually a national crisis, one which threatens to undermine not only the future prospects of young people, but also the strength of our nation as a whole. Now, a fundamental principle of all that the Casey Foundation stands for and all that we try to do is that if you're going to make the future for children in this country better, if you're going to build a brighter future, you've got to adopt a two-generation strategy. That doesn't mean wait 2 generations before things change. What it means is that you've got to simultaneously invest in young children, in their educational success, in their early development, in their development of social skills and cognitive skills, emotional skills. You've got to invest in children, and simultaneously you've got to invest in their parents. You've got to help their parents be on a path towards economic opportunity, security, and success. So it's useful to ask, who are the parents of the most vulnerable young children? Well, they, in fact, are the parents who are between the ages of 16 to 24 and disconnected from the workforce and disconnected from education. The young people who are struggling to get a toehold in the world of work, even as they struggle to take on the awesome responsibilities of parenting. And it turns out, we don't often think about this, it turns out that those skills I was talking about that we all learned on those first few jobs, showing up on time, putting up with tough challenges, frustration, tolerance, all those kinds of things, they actually turn out to be the kinds of skills you need to be a good parent. And so investing in the ability of young people to find and hold jobs is not only investing in their economic success, it's investing in the success of them as parents. Now, we have lots of terms for these young folks who are neither in school nor connected to the workforce. Some people use the term disconnected youth to point us towards the need for connection by 25. Some talk about opportunity youth because these are young people who in fact are quite resilient, and if we invest now, they will in fact take advantage of these opportunities. Some people use the term high-risk youth. Whatever term you use, we're talking about young people who need support to become connected, either through the education system or to jobs. These are young people disproportionately. They are young people of color who lack high skill sets that the modern economy demands. They lack a high school diploma in too many cases, and they face other hurdles, such as having grown up in poverty themselves, or not having a role model that they can identify with or connect with in terms of a path towards work. So this morning's presentations and the panel will look at some of the things we can do to address this problem. As I look around the room and had a chance to say hello to a few folks, this may not be entirely the choir, but it is a lot of the choir. You all are folks who in fact led the movement and have contributed over the last several years to the attention we need to build on this very problem. So the Casey Foundation is just privileged to have you here with us today to join this conversation. I think as I look around the room, it underscores one of the most important elements of this report. If you take nothing else from this report, all the data and all the recommendations and all the policy and the words, et cetera, the one thing I hope you would take from this report is that no one sector can solve this problem alone. Government can't solve this problem alone, although of course we believe there is a critical role for government to play. The nonprofit and the philanthropic sector, the faith community, higher education sector, on, no one sector can solve this alone, but we all have our contributions to make. The private business sector cannot do this alone, but we believe it's absolutely critical to engage and involve the private business sector as we think about this problem. It will take partnership, it will take commitment from all of us. I'm now going to turn it over to Bob Gilloth, who will take us through a more detailed look at the Kids Count report. And Bob's just the right guy to do this. Bob, as many know, is a nationally recognized expert on workforce development, on sector-based employment strategies, on community development. He also happens to be the Vice President for Community and Economic Opportunity at the Casey Foundation, and together with Ryan Chow, works on bringing family economic success tools to our community development work. So Bob, please. There he is. Please take us through the report. Thanks.
Thank you, Patrick, and good morning. I'll be doing a little PowerPointing, so a few of you may want to rearrange yourself by the screens. As Patrick said, what I want to do in the next few minutes is provide a little bit more detail about the challenges that Patrick just laid out. What I'll do is summarize the data in our report, the proposed solutions, and the problem statement that really drives our thinking. You'll find the report in your packets on the table, and I think this discussion will set up the panel discussion to come. I come to this topic having started my career in the 1970s in Chicago, running youth earn and learn pre-apprenticeships in the construction industry. And I have to say we know a lot more today about what works, but I worry that our investments are not keeping up with how much we know about what works. Now, it's important we start off with current data about youth and employment. We use data available across all states for consistency purposes, but also for advocacy purposes at the state level. And what we see is some very disturbing trends that Patrick has outlined. The trend lines on this slide show the employment population ratio over the past decade. And this basically is the rate at which people have access to some employment by age cohort between 2000 and 2011. And you can see that the exception to the rule of a decline in employment rates is the 55 to 64-year-olds, the green line. But employment rates have declined for all other groups, and in particular, they've declined dramatically for youth, 16 to 19, the red line, which dropped nearly half between 2000 and 2011 from 44% to 25%. The decline is about 12% in this time period for 20 to 24-year-olds, the yellow line. Now, what's especially striking about this teen unemployment rate is that it's been around 40% for a couple of decades. And as Patrick said, this is the lowest it's been almost since the Great Depression. Now, if all young people were staying in school and graduating high school and college, we might say that this trend is unfortunate but tolerable. If all young people in all places were affected equally by youth unemployment, we might think about solutions in a different way. But in fact, while a bright spot in this story is that more young people are remaining in school and there are many promising efforts to assist them, we have not seen major changes in graduation rates so far for young people of color. Now, we know that youth and credentials are key to future success, but if they are not enough in themselves, early and continued work experience is an important way to learn the essential skills of work and predicts later earnings and employment. This slide shows the employment population ratio for youth ages 16 to 19 by race. And you can see on this chart that employment declined for all groups of youth in this period, but for Black, Asian, and Hispanic youth, teens have consistently lower rates than white teens. Like most of the critical outcomes for young people that we track in Kids Count, the likelihood that a young person will have a job varies dramatically by where they live. And the states with the lowest employment rate, California, Florida, and Georgia for youth, have rates about 1/3 of the level of states with the highest employment rates for youth, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Nebraska. States with the lowest employment rates are large states, large populations, and they've seen many of the tough challenges, economic challenges we've witnessed in the last few years. In addition to decreasing employment rates for youth, as Patrick said, we've looked at those young people who often are referred to as disconnected or opportunity youth, basically who experience both a disconnection from school and from work. And what we see is there's almost 6.5 million of those young people today, 16 to 24-year-olds in this situation. These are the young people who are having the most difficult time with a transition to adulthood, and many of them are between the ages of 20 to 24, as shown in this slide. Now, although non-Hispanic white youth make up the majority of this group, African American and young people with the lowest incomes are more likely to be out of school and out of work than their peers. Additionally, among the 6.5 million disconnected youth, 1 in 5 are parents of young children. Now, why are youth having trouble finding jobs? Well, we know the economy has changed in the past 5 years, but in fact, declining youth employment began prior to the Great Recession. Other economic and policy factors are at play, as Patrick mentioned. One factor certainly involves skills. As you can see in this graph, more skills were needed for jobs in 2007, the right bar on the chart, compared to 1973, the left bar. There were fewer jobs for high school dropouts, 11% versus 32% in 1973. A smaller number of jobs for high school grads, 30% versus 40%, but more jobs for those who had some college or a college degree, 48% versus 21%. Now, projections bringing this data up to today and looking forward only show increases in this emphasis on skills in the workplace. Youth who are not working or in school also have a hard time getting the help they need. Public agencies serving youth often present unnecessary hurdles that youth have to jump over to get help, or public agencies provide help for one thing but not for multiple issues, like they'll help with academic tutoring but not provide the child care that young people may need to take advantage of it. Additionally, youth who want a job or some form of work experience, like community service or an internship, often can't find a public agency, a nonprofit, or a business that's willing to give a helping hand. Now, there is some good news. As I've said, more youth are staying in school. There are more effective education and job programs today. And there are local collaboratives around the country that are working for collective results around youth employment and education. And they're starting up in many places that we'll talk about. As we think about solutions for turning around declining youth employment, we need to recognize that multiple pathways combining work and education are needed. The diversity of youth aspirations and needs are part of a daunting system change challenge for reconnecting youth to opportunity. Now, there are emerging models around the country where local leaders are grappling with this challenge, like Project U-Turn in Philadelphia. It's a one-stop center that's in the school system. It provides multiple access points through partners and a technology portal. It offers and expands youth coaching and advising, a wide range of education, training, and employment options, and the ability of youth to track their own progress towards credentials. There are many other examples like this around the country, and a number of the young people here today are from some of these programs and partnerships. As we began crafting solutions identified in youth and work, we kept 4 principles in mind as we did this work. Recommendations should build on national momentum and partnerships, not start from scratch. Ensure young people's voices and leadership are present and at the center of the work. Make closing racial and economic disparities a priority of the work, not down the list of priorities, but a top priority. And then build solutions from what's working on the ground. Really take the lessons that many folks are garnering right now and turn them into larger efforts. 6 recommendations are identified in Youth and Work Kids Count report. For each, we identify goals and offer illustrative examples, many of them about groups and programs in the room. The first 2 recommendations in the top left are about getting on the same page to achieve ambitious employment and education results for young people. We need bold national goals, we need flexible resources, and we need local commitments and action to integrate and invest in new ways the resources that we already have at our disposal. The next 3 recommendations are about expanding what works related to jobs and careers. We need to scale up earn and learn partnerships that are showing promising evidence. Be more intentional about creating jobs through entrepreneurship, especially building on the creativity of young people. And importantly, recognize that we will not achieve these bold goals unless without the business partnerships that are essential for expanding work experiences for youth. And then finally, we must take a 2-generation approach for helping young parents advance economically as they help their children grow healthy and successful. In conclusion, Youth and Work reports growing youth unemployment and significant racial and ethnic disparities. At the same time, we offer solutions as a contribution to the national effort underway to change these trends. Casey has a particular interest in scaling effective programs and building evidence, working with the most vulnerable youth, including teen parents, and helping to expand and deepen business commitments to this work. We know from our other efforts in child welfare and juvenile justice that major changes require many partners and a lot of time. But we also have seen that progress can be achieved if we invest smartly and track our progress carefully. We hope our Kids Count report on youth and work adds to the urgency, understanding, and sense of commitment needed to address the youth unemployment challenge. We need government, business, philanthropy, and community to come together with young people to help create a brighter, productive future for the next generation. We are pleased to join this effort and add our voice, expertise, and resources. Thank you for your interest today, and thank you for all your work on behalf of young people. Let me turn it now to Lisa Hamilton.
Thanks so much, Bob. As you just heard, employers can play a vital role in hiring more young people and developing effective earn and learn programs. Our next speaker is Pamela Paulk, Senior Vice President for Human Resources at the Johns Hopkins Health System. She's worked with Casey in numerous Baltimore partnerships to build a stronger community, and she'll describe how Johns Hopkins has developed innovative programs and career pathways for youth. Pamela?
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here today to speak on behalf of employers about this work. And I really appreciate Casey for investing in not only the youth, but how youths help their families thrive. As an employer, that's incredibly important to us. I think it's fitting that we're here in Washington today. All the talk in Washington is about the fiscal cliff, but we as employers are facing our own cliff right now, and it's a workforce cliff. I think that we got a bit of a reprieve. We talked about this for about a decade ago, and then it didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen was one of the graphs that Bob showed, and that is that because of the economic downturn, some of those of us who are a little bit older have decided to stay in the workforce longer. And so that has really masked this cliff, or really moved it along a little bit further. But I can assure you that it's coming. And it's something that I worry about every day, and I think other employers do as well. I look at the demographics of my workforce, and I know that that's coming. And you know, not only is it an age cliff, but it is also a skills cliff. Another graph that Bob showed was about the changing in skills. And we definitely have seen, particularly in the healthcare workforce, is that we need folks with a higher skill level. And many of our youth are not coming, or have not been coming, with those basic skills. And if you ask any employer in the room, they're going to tell you that we can teach them the specific skills. It's those basic life skills that we need them to come with. The things that you can only learn by being on the job. So our recovery strategies for this cliff has a major solution, and that solution is our youth. Kids do count here. I did not talk to Patrick McCarthy before this, and actually when Hopkins began our strategies, we did not read the Kids Count report, but we have a two-generational approach and have for a very, very long time. We are faced with a dilemma every day. Now, I have a workforce of about 30,000 that I'm responsible for. And every day I'm faced with what is a true dilemma. I have a limited number of jobs to give. And are we going to give them to those adults that already have some experience and we know need that job? Or are we going to give that job to a young person who we are developing for the future? It's a real dilemma. But we know that we have to do both, and we have to do both simultaneously. or else we are going to find ourselves not able to care for our patients in the future. Now, Johns Hopkins is a 125-year-old institution, and we think will be around for 125 more. We have many of our workers are multi-generational. Their aunts work there, their grandparents work there, their parents work there, their brothers and sisters work there, have worked there. And so, in fact, we are looking at our workforce as a true family. We are very, very lucky that we have a fairly well-known name. And so if I just look at our flagship hospital, our main hospital that sits up in Baltimore on the same original 13 acres that Mr. Johns Hopkins dedicated to us 125 years ago, at that flagship we hire on average about 2,000 people a year. Last year, for those 2,000 jobs, we got 192,000 applications. Think about that, 192,000 applications for 2,000 jobs. How do you choose? How do you possibly choose from that? Now again, we could go through that infinite stack and we could pick the absolute cream of the crop, right? But in fact, we know that if we do that, we are not going to be prepared for the future. And old man Hopkins would not be very happy with us, because when he dedicated this hospital, he said that he not only wanted us to be a world-renowned educational institution, research institution, and patient care institution, but he also wanted us to be an anchor for his beloved Baltimore. So he would expect us to make sure that we're taking care of the community. Now, about a decade ago, when we looked at hiring youth, we completely looked at it as a social program, right? This is something nice to do for the community, give them a little work to do for the summer, give them a little change in their pocket, and that's a really nice thing to do. But then as we looked at this cliff that was coming, we realized that, in fact, this had to be an integrated part of our workforce plan. We needed to grab these kids early, and we needed to make sure that they knew how to work, not only for us, hopefully for us one day, but if not, for the other employers in the area. And we set up many different strategies to do that. I'm not going to go into the details of each because I'm sure that your panel will talk about some of those, and you all are very familiar with them. But just to give you an example, this is not a one-trick thing. We use the Year Up program. Some of you have heard of that, Year Up, which helps us train for IT jobs, one of the biggest growing parts of our work. We use year-round internships for people from the local high schools. We partner with a couple of the high schools in the area. Actually, we go even younger than that. We have adopted fourth grades all over Baltimore, and we send staff in and bring the kids in because we want them to understand about work very early on. But the internships, of course, only are for the high school students. We also work with some of the grants on placing at-risk youth, and we do about between a dozen and 16 youth every year that we place in internships, and then do, in fact, hire some of them. We even have a program that for many, many years takes young people in high schools who have mental disabilities, and they work in some of our departments. And in fact, many of them do also get hired permanently. But the thing that we actually probably spend the most effort on is our summer jobs program. Every year we hire, along with the university, about 250 young people. Well, not about 250, exactly 250 young people. It's a crazy day on the day that they all start work. We also believe in education, not only work but education. And so if any of you have kids in high school and you're looking for a job, if you come to Johns Hopkins, for every employee, no matter what level you are, when your child goes to college, we pay 50% of that child's tuition to go anywhere in the United States to college. Now, you think, how can you possibly afford to do that? The program more than pays for itself, not only because we are stabilizing families by getting that next generation educated, and stabilizing our community is critical to our hospital and to our business. But it's also a retention technique for the parents, because guess what? Those parents are not going anywhere as long as their kids are in college, because we're paying half their tuition. And that means that they stay with us, and the more they stay with us, then the better our retention is. And then we can spend that money that we would spend on recruiting new people on our youth. So we treat every one of those workers, every one of those youth, as a valuable worker. Not only a future worker, but a current worker. Again, instead of a social program where we just came in and they signed up and we handed them a job, now we make them work for it. They go through a regular process. I can't emphasize enough how important that is. They have to apply. They have to come in and interview. They have to do a good job on the interview, even though most of them we know we're going to hire anyway. A story from last summer was our head of recruitment interviewed a young man, and he was just so shy, and he kept his head ducked, and he just had no confidence at all. And she said, you know what, James, I'm going to give you a little feedback. I'm going to send you to the back of the line, and I want you to come back and interview again. And the next time, I want you to sit up straight. I want you to look me in the eye, and I want you to answer those questions with confidence, because I know that you can do it. And so he went to the back of the line, and when he came back, in fact, he did all of those things. That was his first lesson. As simple as it was his very first lesson in what his future work life was going to be like. But all of this is not enough. So the biggest thing that we do, and one of our biggest barriers, is invest in our supervisors in how to work with young people or any other group that we work with that comes to us with some barriers for employment, is to spend time with the supervisors and the mentors on how to appreciate and help youth during this special transition time. And sometimes when that doesn't work, we get our pharmacy to go around and give everybody a good dose of patience, because it takes a little bit of that some days too. But you know what? For us in healthcare, which is the largest growing industry right now in the United States, and so probably the people who have the most vested interest in making sure that this cliff doesn't occur, is that we have the ability to say something when all of their patients are worn out, and they just say, "Don't send me another kid next year." I look at them and say, "Oh boy, you better invest in them, because they're the people who are going to be taking care of you one day when you're sick in that bed or in the nursing home. So you better do right by them." But we need policymakers and we need advocates to help us with this. We need to encourage more employers to be involved and to take a risk with kids, and I can assure you it's a risk well worth it. We need to make sure that we're giving them meaningful opportunities, because there is nothing that substitutes for work training than work itself. And meaningful work is so critical. So let me just again commend all of you for being here today. As Patrick said, you probably look a lot like the choir, so I'm preaching to the choir, but each and every one of us has to go back and send this message back to our communities and to help with this cliff that we are approaching. And as always, I commend the Annie E. Casey Foundation for doing this wonderful, wonderful work. This would be a lost generation if we didn't invest in them. And so I'm looking forward to the rest of the morning and to the conversations and how employers can contribute to this conversation in a very meaningful way. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pamela. It's wonderful to hear from such a committed employer. And now we get to turn to the voice of young people. It's my pleasure to introduce Jameel L. Alexander of Youth Build USA and a member of the National Council of Young Leaders. Jameel is an outstanding advocate for his generation, and he'll introduce a special video that was created by the Amplification Project. The Amplification Project builds advocacy campaigns based on policy research and digital storytelling coordinated with on-the-ground advocacy. Jameel will preview this look at disconnected youth and those working to reconnect them to school and help prepare them for employment. Jameel?
Thank you. Beautiful. Thank God for this moment right now. My family who's joining me, and the Casey Foundation. I really appreciate this. The opportunities continue to present themselves, and I appreciate it so much, President Pat. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jameel Alexander. I currently serve on the National Council of Young Leaders. I am employed at Christmas Addicts Association in York, PA. I am also a Youth Build AmeriCorps alumnus. 11 years ago, I was disconnected. Youth. For about 10, 11 plus more years from childhood through my teenage years. In my community in Philadelphia back then, I can admit I was influenced by the negativity surrounding me, a slippery slope that became a vertical line, and at the bottom got caught up. Did some juvie time, some juvenile time, put on probation, and mandated to do community service for hundreds of hours, which I thought was worse. During my time, one day while I was mopping the floor, a director of Christmas Addicts Youth Build AmeriCorps approached me with a smile and asked, who was I? We began engaging in a conversation, and all I remember now is the money part. Flat out. Flat out. You can earn money, learn a trade, and an education award. The education award at that time I knew nothing about, but that money had me intrigued. This opportunity was a hand-on approach, as she's explained. As a participant, I became empowered through education, productive in serving my community, rehabilitating low-income housing, and as a TA. I became a positive force through this Learn and Earn program with an underlining of leadership development. As a participant, I began to demolish the idea that I had that community service was a punitive measure to negative outcome. As a participant, I embodied the fact that I must be the change that I want to see in the world. Stop blaming the system, the environment, and even my family circumstances. The tagline, rebuilding our lives while rebuilding our communities, became a motto when I even told my peers and to you all right now as I continue to grow on. In closing right now, I'm just a representative and a humble servant. I'm pleased to be here. I'm a product of comprehensive programming and soon to be husband to the beautiful lady, and my daughter's birthday is today. My son's birthday yesterday. So when President Pat was talking about that family issue, and then Miss Pam came back and talked about those basic life skills, that was all wrapped up in this comprehensive youth bill, and I just thought about the money when it was all said and done. And I'm really pleased to be here. So now this video is going to have some fellow voice members, some fellow council members. Please enjoy it. Excuse the nervousness. Opening doors, connecting America's youth to opportunity. Thank you all for your time.
How do you blend the support, the navigation, the academic skills, and the exposure to work in a pathway that's going to help youngsters move from off, the situation of being disconnected to really being prepared at a level that they could succeed in the labor market?
My brother he wasn't always home, so I had nobody else to help me stand up on my own. I'm the type of kid who's I doubt myself a lot. So it's once I don't have somebody in my background to help me out, it's well, if you're not showing me that you're helping me or you want me to succeed, then I'm not going to try for myself.
This issue is not just about one kid's ability to get a job or not. It's about the broader society and the really responsibility that we have as a society to make sure that our kids are prepared as they can be for the future.
We all struggle the same every day. We get up and we try to do everything we can to be the best people we can. I realized how great of a program Youth Build really was, it led me to change my life entirely. Everything I did and the way I was thinking, just the old ways and everything just changed completely. Now I have stable housing, I have my family back in my life, and I'm employed here at Youthville.
A high school dropout. I dropped out of 11th grade because I was pregnant. I came here, I was unemployed. The program offers employment and it offers referring you to get back into school, lead you into the right path.
I wouldn't have done it without the YES program because there was no other school that would take me. So it was like they was like my last lifeline.
Europe was more than just a program that educated me and that helped me get into a good internship or a good job. Like they did more to me than that. Like they helped me like personally, like all my life.
Johns Hopkins has hired many of these youth, and they're very specifically on a career track towards excelling in the information technology department.
We're able to have the extra manpower here that we need by having these interns here, and we can basically train them to be the model employees that we would like them to be.
We need to work together to develop a national strategy, set some bold goals, align funding, and make funding flexible so we're not just following youth through a particular system, but really helping them advance through the ups and downs on a trajectory to be successful.
Yeah, I love to get up and put my suit on and come to work and be around professionals that I aspire to be one day. So it's a great experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Travis has been a great intern. He shows up to work on time. He's always dressed professionally and always exudes that positive professionalism to all our customers and to all our staff.
When I got here, I fell in love with the job. As far as a dream job, I guess I'm living the dream right now.
Thank you so much. I'd like to ask the panelists to come to the stage, and while you're getting settled, I'll introduce you. Thank you so much to Jameel for that introduction. You are a wonderful example and inspiration for young people, and the young voices in that video certainly gave us the inspiration and reason we need to stay committed to this work. As our panelists come forward, we want to thank them for being here. We have a moderator in Amy Scott, who is an education correspondent at the award-winning radio program Marketplace, who they did a story on our report this morning. I hope many of you heard it. Many of Amy's recent stories have focused on the challenges that face young adults either entering or trying to regain jobs in today's challenging workplace. In the interest of time, I will direct your attention to the bios you have in your packet. But today we have Stacy Stewart with us, who is the new U.S. President of United Way Worldwide, John Wilcox, who is Executive Director of Corporate Voices for Working Families. We have Karen Pittman, who is the President and CEO of the Forum for Youth Investment. We have John Bridgeland, who is the President and CEO of Civic Enterprises. We have Melody Barnes, who is Chair of the Aspen Institute Forum for Community Solutions, and Mark Edwards, who is the Executive Director of Opportunity Nation. We're delighted to have all of you here with us. Thank you.
Hi there. Hi, everybody. I haven't met all the panelists yet, so hi down there. Bridge, I'm wondering if you can start us off by talking a little bit about the economic impact of all of these young people who are connected neither to jobs nor to school.
Sure. I actually think this has been a forgotten population, and the risk has been we viewed them as a nation as liabilities.
But I had this transformative experience where I was at a Opportunity Nation Summit in New York, and Jameel and Dorothy had organized people literally, come from all across the country to come in and have the policymakers and the adults simply listen to their stories. And one after another, they stood up, told these extraordinary stories of challenge, of barriers, of incarceration, of growing up in tough circumstances. And yet, to a person, they were articulate, they had bold ideas. I literally took 10 pages of notes, and it informed the Opportunity Nation agenda. So I think the risk is that we go too quickly to the thought that there are liabilities. But knowing that if people didn't believe in the moral and the individual case to help reconnect the 6.5 million Americans who were disconnected from school and work, in the context of the White House Council for Community Solutions that Melody Barnes ignited, we made what Patty called the Business Case USA. And we went to Columbia University, some of the finest labor economists, and discovered that the 6.5 million, 6.7 million young people disconnected from school and work cost the nation $93 billion every year in lost tax payments and increased social services. And if you actually include lost revenue and costs to victims of crime, it's about $200+ billion a year. And if you take one cohort of 16 to 24-year-olds, and again, I hate to even speak in terms of a cohort because the heterogeneity of this population, their individual stories and lives, I call it a generation of talent needlessly lost. And I think we ought to talk about them as opportunity youth because they are. But you've asked me the question, so I'll answer it. One cohort of 16 to 24-year-olds cost the nation $1.6 trillion over the course of their lifetimes. And again, that's just one cohort. And if you factor in, again, lost earnings, costs to victims of crime, private health care costs, it's $4.7 trillion to the nation. And so for me, that's just another playing card for us to use on the Hill and with policymakers to show them the importance. One final point, we did a follow-up study with Columbia showing the return on investment in investing in these programs that help Opportunity Youth, and discovered that it was more than a five-fold return on investment if we invest in programs like Youth Build and Year Up and the national service programs that Jameel talks so compellingly about in terms of his own lifeline back to reconnection.
I'd like to come back to you later to see if that message is being heard and has been effective. But Stacey, I wanted to ask you, I understand the United Way has held forums around the country, and some of them involving young people, the young people we're talking about. What are you hearing from them about their opportunities and what they need from policymakers?
Sure, and thanks for allowing me to be here, and thanks to Casey for doing this again. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to have this conversation, and we did do that in partnership with the White House Council for Community Solutions. In about 40 communities, we asked United Ways to host a really diverse set of conversations across the community, and certainly involve youth in that. So we actually heard from a wide range of people, and out of that, the youth voice was really compelling. And one of the things that we heard from young people, and I don't mean to say that this was the only message we heard, these were sort of themes that came out of the conversation. There was a very strong theme of isolation. The young people felt very, very isolated in their own communities and their own neighborhoods. Jameel's shaking his head up and down. They had not a good sense of how to connect in, and really what I thought was really shocking and disturbing was the notion, and this actually came from one of the young women we heard from. She said, I feel like my parents and my parents' generation have really abandoned us. We feel very much alone. Very unsure of how to connect in with opportunity, very sure of even whether or not opportunity existed for them at all. And so one of the things that came out of it was, and this wasn't explicitly said, was that because young people were yearning for an opportunity to connect with adults, someone that could show them the way, similar to how Jameel had an adult touch his life, and that put him on a pathway for success. Was one of the reasons why United Way, in addition to our work in terms of comprehensively and collectively organizing communities as a result of these conversations to sort of figure out the right strategies to get at this, how to put more youth on the path for opportunity, we actually put in place a whole new strategy to actually recruit 1 million adults to serve as reading buddies and tutors and mentors for young people as a singular strategy in addition to other things that we could do to make sure that we connected more young people with adults who could be those concerned and caring adults in a young person's life. We know the research shows that when that happens, young people can find opportunities. It can be the connector to them being put on that pathway. But the notion that young people today not only are being left out of opportunities for school and work, but also feel abandoned by us, was something that was certainly a call to action for us, and we felt like we couldn't sit back and wait for yet another generation to lose track. We needed to do something to actually make sure that we felt more on the hook as adults to make sure those young people had an opportunity for a better life.
So Mark, I wanted to ask you about your opportunity index. You've developed a metric looking at this disconnection around the country and the connections available to youth. What have you found?
Well, Opportunity Nation thinks about opportunity through this lens, you say the Opportunity Index, which is a statistical measure of opportunity at the state and community level. And it has about 16 indicators that come together to create opportunity scores, actually sort of a way of measuring opportunity. And it includes some predictable things like the unemployment rate, the poverty rate, the percentage of young adults who graduate from high school, whether they have access to the internet, access to preschool, those kinds of things that create communities of opportunity. One of the indicators is actually the percentage of 16 to 24-year-olds who are in school and in work. And we did some analysis this past year that indicated that when you look across the country, that indicator is most closely correlated with the community's opportunity score more than any other. That actually the unemployment rate, the poverty rate, access to internet, access to preschool, primary care physicians, those are important indicators, but the indicator that measures the percentage of 16 to 24-year-olds has a real ripple effect in communities and states. And so when young adults are doing well, communities do well. When they're not doing well, communities don't do as well. And so we are excited as a campaign to really focus on creating these stronger pathways for young adults as really a critical as a critical way for us to be successful, not just in individual communities, but really as a country, because we know just how important they are. And I think that this is actually a great time for us to be doing this. I think employers are at the table now in ways that 10 or 15 years ago they weren't. And so those conversations are very productive. And I think there's also a chance for, at the policy level, we've been seeing some interest from a bipartisan perspective that this is an area that is important. This is not owned by one political party or not. This is in our country's self-interest to make sure we're successful here.
I think that's a good segue to John Wilcox, who represents employers in this conversation. We're hearing that they're at the table. We heard from one earlier. What are some of the ways that employers have made a real difference in providing these kinds of opportunities for young people?
Well, thanks. Employers are at the table, but they aren't yet at the table in such numbers that it'll fix the problem. I think it's important to recognize that. Pamela at PG&E called out the 2,000 or so young people, 2,000 or so hires they make every year, which is a lot, and they're absolutely to be commended to their commitment to young people. But if you think about 2,000 hires in the context of the 6.5 million disconnected youth in this country, when I heard the numbers, whipped out my handy calculator, and it's something like 0.03%. In other words, it's a drop in the bucket. At Corporate Voices, we have spent the last couple of years identifying leaders like PG&E who are making a splash in terms of taking what amount to cultural leaps inside the business community to get after the problem of disconnected youth. And Pamela was absolutely right that there is a cliff coming in the business sector. And that cliff both provides incentive for us and a hook to get businesses' attention. Even as business works to identify the workers that they need to fill their needs now and in the future, as their workers retire, as skill levels that are needed for entry level and higher level jobs go up, they still confront this cultural problem. And owning it, I think, is part of what is incumbent on the business community and everybody in this room. And that cultural problem is simple. For the past couple of generations, whether or not you had a degree, whether you had a credential of academic achievement, has been the key that gets you in the door to employment. And for lots of good business reasons, businesses all over the country have made decisions that, okay, for these positions, we're either going to hire people who have high school degrees or not. Increasingly, the answer is not. Increasingly, the answer is that if you don't have a degree, you don't get looked at. And so part of the challenge is to use the levers that we've identified to get over that cultural hurdle. And in some places, we're pleased to report it's working. Point to a company like Southwire in rural Georgia, who started out, like many companies, thinking that, hey, what can we do for our community? And rural Georgia, like many rural counties, has a problem with kids graduating from high school. They went out, they partnered with the school, they set up a facility in which kids could work, and now the outcome of that is that graduation rates in this rural Georgia county have gone up 10% ever since this 12 for Life program that Southwire started began. That's a fantastic outcome. It's duplicable across the country. The trick is going to be identifying business leaders who can take the charge and driving it. And not the least of the things that we're excited about because of this room is that we're working on a new project with the Ad Council. Our sense is that this movement, if you will, is at a point where what it really needs is broad dissemination. And the Ad Council has agreed to do a national campaign targeting business and targeting this change as something the business needs to look at, both in terms of their community relations, but ultimately in terms of their bottom line, because that's where business has to be touched. If you can identify for business the drivers that PG&E has identified, the back to the bottom line, so the folks in the accounting office are happy, what you get is sustaining change, and that's really what we're all about here.
All right, Melody Barnes with the Aspen Institute Forum for Community Solutions. The report acknowledges some local collaborations that are effective, and you are providing funding for such collaborations at the local level. Can you talk about some of the promising solutions you're seeing?
Sure, that would be my pleasure. Well, first of all, I want to thank Casey for having us here and for being such leaders in this work. And then I will also take a moment, because I'm the chair, but Steve Patrick and Monique Miles are the director and deputy director of the Aspen Forum, and they are also in the room, so I want to acknowledge them as well for their day-to-day work on this. As you said, there are some really wonderful, promising models. I mean, the beauty of this is that we already know a lot of what needs to be done. The key is to doing it and to bringing it to scale and to make sure that we're impactful. And some of the work that the White House Council started was to identify the SMART models. And I want to talk about some of the, I'll talk about them in macro terms and then identify some things that are specifically working, but also put this in context. There, Steve, to put this in context as well. So one particular model is one that blends together community colleges that are also working with nonprofits and also working with the private sector. And that blend is important because it brings together a pathway for some sort of post-secondary credential. It also involves the marketplace. It involves private sector business people. And it also brings together nonprofits that are very smart in terms of the training models that are critical if we're to provide young people with the kinds of skills that they need. So if you look not very far from here, you have Northern Virginia Community College. You have Year Up, which is a program that we've all been talking about this morning. You've got Goodwill, and you've also got private sector leaders that are working together to provide opportunities to opportunity youth. We know that these are working again. My colleagues at the Aspen Institute, through a program called Courses to Education, or Courses to Employment, have been looking at this and identifying the fact that helping people navigate the labor market, helping young people with the different kinds of challenges that are involved when you're trying to go to school and you've got children and you're trying to work at the same time, and being able to do that and do that well, to understand the kind of training, to work with sectors that are actually looking for employment, to make sure that the skills that are being provided are the right skills, that's really critical. So that's one model. Another model, and it's been touched on, I think Bob mentioned it when he was PowerPointing with us earlier today, is that of the service model. Again, very, very important. National service and local service models also working with nonprofits. And often we think about national service, we think about it in different ways. We think about the benefit to the community that's being served. We often think about the benefit for the individual, and sometimes it can be a model for college students or those who have finished college, but also thinking about opportunity youth as those who are providing the service and the skills that are being learned as they're also engaged and involved in their communities. And right now, in a disaster that's front of mind for all of us, you think about Hurricane Sandy, there are young people, opportunity youth, who are involved with CORE, local and national CORE, on the ground in New York, in New Jersey, learning skills, making a difference in those communities, and beyond I don't want to use the word opportunity, but beyond helping with the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, also working in wetlands, also working in national parks, also building low-income housing. All of that's making a difference in communities in a way that really matters. And we were just at a meeting on Friday that Bridge and Alan Casey convened, and we were talking about national service and its import, and Wendy Spencer, the head of the Corporation for National and Community Service, was there. And she talked about the importance of that model of national service going in places where it's really needed and the difference that it provides, and also, quite frankly, the skills that are being provided, but the money that's being saved. Literally, FEMA is being saved millions and millions and millions of dollars, while at the same time, we've got young people that are doing important work. And then we've also mentioned Youth Build, a model that brings together a nonprofit with support from not only the government, but the philanthropic sectors that's doing amazing work, as is evidenced by the truly gifted and wonderful and talented young people that are moving through those programs. So those are three different kinds of models, and there are others out there, but I wanted to mention those. And I'll just take a second to pull back for a second and say we have these SMART programs. As I mentioned, we know and we have very good ideas about what works. What we have to do is we have to ensure impact with our programs, and we have to make sure that we are taking these SMART programs to scale. Because as some people have said, we are often program rich, but we're system poor. And we have to make change in our systems. That's something else that was mentioned earlier today, so that we are taking them to scale in smart ways. That is one of the things that's at the root of the work that we're doing at the Aspen Forum, to make sure that we're mobilizing our stakeholders, that we're bringing more education and awareness to the framework, to these strategies that work, that we're investing in communities in a smart way, and that we're making the kind of policy change that's necessary that will either remove hurdles that prevent the system change that's necessary, or that will put in place the kinds of smart changes that will allow system change to take place and to be more prevalent.
I think it's a good time to bring in Karen Pittman from the Forum for Youth Investment. Speaking of partnership, where do you see potential for partnerships between the nonprofit sector and the government?
Almost everywhere. I think that when we think about nonprofits, we think first and foremost of organizations that have created the kind of innovative, comprehensive programs that Melody just talked about, Youth Build and Year Up, et cetera. And the nonprofit sector plays a huge role in making sure that we can bring that innovation together, making sure that we have national networks like the National Youth Employment Coalition that really cobble together the lessons that are being learned across the country and pull them up. But in addition to that, and making sure that we're constantly working at the federal and the state levels to make sure that we have the resources to take those programs to scale, the other word that's been used a lot today is partnerships. And we've said over and over again, Patrick started by saying this isn't just one system, it isn't just one program. Jameel talked about the importance of having folks really bring that comprehensive set of services to him, even though in his mind what got his attention was the word, job and money. Those things cut across so many policies, from education to workforce investment to juvenile justice, foster care, child welfare, social services, Medicaid, and then we don't even think about hidden policies at the state level and the local level that affect young people, like transportation and housing. Things that often provide low-hanging fruit, that when we're helping young people reconnect, when we're helping them take advantage of opportunities, it's often childcare and housing and transportation that become the barriers, and those are the things that we don't think about. So there are a couple of things that I think are really wonderful opportunities for partnership between the nonprofit sector and federal and state and local government. One is really to explore this idea of what it takes to have those partners at the table. This takes permanent coordinating bodies, whether we're talking about children's cabinets at the state level, we're talking about youth commissions at the local level, whether it's in the mayor's office or the county council. We don't just bring people to the table to look at things for a minute and say, oh, let's put together a plan. We really have to begin to invest in permanent coordinating bodies that are looking at policies, looking for low-hanging fruit, and building the level of trust that's needed to really start to, in some ways, do horse swapping, to make sure that the kind of opportunities that are happening for young people and are available. The language change that's being proposed from disconnected youth to opportunity youth really needs to be paralleled in our systems. We need to move from disconnected systems and disconnected policies to opportunity systems and opportunity policies in which we're not waiting for young people to fail and then looking for the policy or the program that supports them. We, as adults, especially those who are looking at policies and resources, are really looking in advance to do that. So one of the things that the Forum has been doing, which I think is a small but critical role, is figuring out how we advance the dialogue between federal, state, and local coordinating bodies, where we've already got folks coming to the table saying, we think we understand the need for flexibility, we understand the need for waivers, we understand the need to really look across these policies and figure out how we can help them fit together. But how do we do that? We don't just sort of do a blanket, let's let everybody do everything. We have to do that with some level of specificity. And so the idea of having waivers to help communities that want to do the work that Melody talked about has been raised. And we and other folks have been working with the Office of Budget Management to really make sure, management and budget, to make sure that when we look at the idea of performance pilots, we look at the idea of offering flexibility to cobble together those dozens of programs that you need to have in exchange for performance going to scale. Right? So we'll give you the flexibility to use the dollars differently, but the bottom line is we really have to move the needle for these young people at a level where we can see this happening. In order to have that flexibility and in order to really take advantage of that, you need a sophisticated partnership, not one that was just thrown together on the back of an envelope, but the right people in the right room with the right conviction, with enough time and enough trust that they can get the job done. And we need those dialogues to be happening from local to state to federal. And one of the things that's been very exciting about our work over the past couple of years, and when I say our work, I mean Elizabeth Gaines and Thaddeus Ferber, who are here in the room someplace, because they really do the work at the Forum. But one of the things that has been exciting is actually creating opportunities for those dialogues. And what we learned very quickly was that there's a word that gets thrown out all the time, which is barriers. There are barriers to being able to do this flexible work. And what we found was that the main barrier is that we are extremely risk averse. So if we're working with young people who perhaps have taken too many risks in their lives, on the policy side, we're working with folks who don't like to take risks at all. And what we found is that when we got them sitting together talking very concretely about what would it take to make increased transportation and housing options for young people? Well, you look at the piece of paper and they'd say, well, there's a barrier here. The feds say we can't do this, or the states say we can't do this. And then if you actually have those folks in the room, they say, no, we didn't say you couldn't do it. And then it turns out that what we didn't say is that you could do it. So how people are reading policy is if it doesn't tell me I can do it, I'm going to assume I can't. That's a culture that we have to change. And one of the key ways that nonprofits can work together is really just create the opportunities for these conversations. That turns out to be a very important piece. As we're doing that, we obviously then have to continue to talk about and figure out how we're going to scale up these important programs. But the bottom line is we need to be coordinating our policies. We need our policies to be calling for the use of permanent coordinating bodies rather than calling for new coordinating bodies. We need mechanisms to look across policies at the same time and figure out how we can increase flexibility around eligibility, around outcomes, around how dollars are used, and most importantly, we really need to be increasing the conversations vertically that are happening from federal to state to local.
I'd love to just open the conversation up a bit and have you respond to what one another have said, but I thought I would sort of throw out a question to get that going. We heard in the report that 21% of disconnected or opportunity youth have children of their own between age 20 and 24. And we heard about the need for two-generation approaches. I'm wondering if any of you could comment on what that might look like, an example of how you can work on child development and parent development at the same time.
Well, I'll just go. I mean, I think for us, and we've had lots of conversations with Casey around this, we have invested pretty heavily in integrated financial service delivery, but it's really much more comprehensive about how to get not only adults on path for success in building opportunity to get better employment, to build savings and build opportunity for their lives. But it is very much connected also into, we need to continue to build this on how do we make sure that the next generation coming behind them has, is also on that path for opportunity as well as making sure that the children in their lives do not, in fact, represent barriers to those adults being able to stay on that path for themselves. So, for us, it's really important. We spend a lot of time at United Way really thinking about who are the collective sets of partners that need to be at the table with us. And increasingly, we're getting out of the normal choir of partners who are at the table with us. When Karen was talking, it reminded me of the fact that, for us, and it certainly is true that we've got to think about the diverse set of partners who need to be at the table with respect to policy development. But the issue for us really, and we found this in our community conversations, was we had a hard time, and communities seemed to have a hard time finding out where kids were to actually find how to connect them back. So, these young people are opportunity youth for sure, but they actually are disconnected. And, we have a tradition in our network of working within systems, K through 12 system or the child welfare system. These are kids who are not in a system, and then we have to figure out how to access them and how to involve those partners in meeting those young people where they are. These young people are in many ways homeless, so our homeless service providers being brought into the conversation. They're in the criminal justice system. How are we involving them in the criminal justice system? We have to do things much differently than we've ever done them before if we actually are going to be effective. And it certainly is true that the federal level, and I think some reporter asked me about this, was I excited about whether or not was I excited about the federal officials having a real focus on this now? And I think it is great that at a federal level we might have an increasing focus on this, but we also know that these issues are really going to happen and get solved on the ground. And then when that groundswell of success and alignment on the ground actually bubbles up to change at the state and local level is probably how it's going to happen. That's why I think what Melody's doing is so exciting, and I think what our work with the White House Council stimulated was a real focus on the models at a local level of how this could come together. Our integrated service delivery model is really a local model that actually starts to find what are the local solutions, and how do we, if we're doing that in multiple markets and a critical mass of markets, how do we take what we're learning and elevate those things up so that real policy change, systemic change can be brought on, again, at a state and a federal level as well.
And I forgot one job I was given was to point out that you have to leave for a board meeting in New York.
I have a few more minutes.
A little early.
Stick around. I
don't want to see her run off the stage. Don't take it personally.
I would just
go
add
ahead.
that before, or as Stacy takes off to her board meeting, just to say how important this reality on the ground is. We have a lot of policy programs over the decades. I see Linda Harris, who's been sort of the catalyst for much of this work for 30 and 40 years. And thanks to the Casey Foundation, there was a national cross-section survey in 23 diverse communities around the United States that really listened to the perspectives of young people. And we learned, by the way, about 1 million of these opportunity youth are heads of household. They have children. They're responsible for caring not just for their children, but often a sick mother, grandmother, or family member. We learn about their barriers. But we also learned, unlike many of the adults that were viewing disconnected youth, that the young people were optimistic, that they saw the relevance of education and work to fulfilling their dreams. They had enormous dreams. I met this one girl in Philadelphia who wanted to be an astrophysicist. And at the age of 16, she dropped out of school, and we asked her, what are you doing? She was literally working the streets of Philadelphia. How someone goes from wanting to be an astrophysicist to working the streets of Philadelphia is just uncertain to me. But then, interestingly, they identified with particularity their barriers. What were the barriers to reconnection? And then specifically, what were the promising efforts that would reconnect them, like earn and learn models where they could stay in school and earn money at a job or have an apprenticeship. I think we need to clone Pamela and your program at Johns Hopkins. In fact, I think we need to take the Patrick, Bob, Pamela, Jameel show on the road. Because to me, the question is, how do we take this extraordinary moment where we've got the White House Council for Community Solutions, we've got Melody's program at Aspen, we've got Mark's Opportunity Nation, we've got the work of the Youth Forum for Youth Investment, Jobs for the Future, Youth Build Europe, all these programs, and harness that energy to maybe establish a bold national goal to cut, the opportunity youth population in half over a period of time. And then when I look at Steve Patrick, I think about, the dropout epidemic wasn't on the national map. And then two things broke through. One was the youth voice, which now we have in spades in this issue. And the second was the economic case, the economic return on investment to get businesses to the table, which are so fundamental. So to me, the question is, how do we harness all that capacity, elevate the youth voice, make this return on investment argument, and ensure when you go into the Strive partnerships in Cincinnati, it isn't all these wonderful nonprofits and other organizations working together, but there's also the business sector there, which I think is missing from the table in a lot of these communities today.
Can I just
go ahead.
Hop in? In talking about this two-generation strategy, some of the ways that we are focusing on and thinking about addressing that, one, great partnerships, and in some cases internal at Aspen. There's a fantastic program led by Ann Mosley at Aspen, which is called Ascend, which specifically focuses on the two-generation strategy. How do you break the cycle of poverty by focusing on both the parent and focusing on children? That's a partnership that we're strengthening internally as we think about how we're doing our work at the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions. Again, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. That's a waste of time, and we don't have time to do that. What we're trying to do is figure out how to make the wheel faster and better. Secondly, as we're thinking about, and you mentioned the fact that one of the goals of the Aspen Forum is to invest in communities, and we are creating an Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund that we're building right now that will invest in collaboratives in communities right now, going to many of the things that we've been talking about on stage, bringing together working across sectors in communities so that we are animating and activating the business community along with nonprofits and foundations and people on grassroots, as well as the systems that already exist in those communities on a local or state and as we look broader or regional level, so that we can actually work towards the big goals that we want to create. And as we're doing that, obviously our focus is on getting young people on the pathway to education with a credential that will allow them to have a credential that is valued in the workplace so that they can have a job and a career. Not just the job that allows you to do something that you can't support your family on, but one that allows you to get a credential that can be stacked and to go out and to build a life for yourself and your family off of that. That involves looking at systems that include children and young people as well. One of an excellent set of collaboratives that exists that Bridge just mentioned was the Strive Network. Cradle to Career, they're now thinking even more about Opportunity Youth. And by working with them and working together, it allows us to think about this pathway that we're trying to create, but how it links up to the work that's being done on early education, the work that's being done on the K through 12 level, so that you create this seamless thread that allows us ultimately to prevent the disconnection that we're concerned about, and for us right now to make sure that we are interrupting and disrupting that disconnection and creating that pathway that allows young people to succeed and to be able to support themselves and their families, and ultimately then the community is better for it.
Yeah, please.
I think as Melody talks about, we have to think about opportunity as more than just simply a job. Jobs are critical, obviously, and essential, but I think that the whole issue around two-generation requires an acknowledgement of the fact that these are complex situations, and just simply focusing exclusively on the employment piece is not going to do it. And I think the second thing is that we have to also, I think, reframe how we think about success in this country. Success in this country is not just about a four-year college Bachelor of Arts degree. We've got to think about multiple pathways for success and acknowledge that people come from lots of different places and will go on to be very successful through lots of different rungs. There's no sort of single solution here, and I think that the need to embrace that complexity and to acknowledge it is going to be an important piece to making sure we're having solutions that actually are meeting people where they are.
Can you talk about what opportunity means beyond a job? I mean, I assume you're referring to education, happiness, being a good citizen, things like that. But how do you develop those opportunities?
No, I
as
think
well?
those are important. But within the Opportunity Index, we look at a whole set of inputs in communities that are important to achieving opportunity. So, for example, we know that there are significant percentages of our population, including young adults, who don't have access to the internet. I mean, how do you create, if you don't have access to the internet, that creates significant barriers in and of itself. We know that there are communities that don't have healthy food. We know that there are communities that don't have access to high quality preschool. These are all part of what I think creates an opportunity community. And so I think these systems have to work together for us to be successful. It's not just about plopping down jobs into these places, because the lives that young adults lead are ones that are complex, that we're not all sort of at the same place at the same time. And so I think we have to acknowledge that complexity.
And Amy, if I could jump in there, I think that Mark's points are really important for us to listen to and think about, especially for this population and the two generations. The Strive Network has sort of come into this country almost like a tsunami to suggest to people that it is possible to get business and education and higher education leaders together to really state ambitious goals and then try to achieve them at scale, really leveraging their resources in a very strategic way to move forward. And the goals are clearly those goals that are moving young people towards education and work success, sort of along that educational pipeline. In our work, and I think in particular as we talk about this population, we really have to listen to what Mark and others have said and make sure that we are having almost visual metaphors for insulating the education pipeline. Because the reasons that young people are disconnecting are sometimes academic reasons, but they are so much often reasons that have to do with social factors, with family issues, with other things that are going on in their lives, or just with the fact that they are not building the skills and competencies that are connected to being able to succeed academically or succeed in the workforce. Patrick started off by talking about the importance of just having those skills like work ethic, and Corporate Voices has done the studies looking at what employers are looking for. You can build the specific skills, but those ideas around teamwork and work ethic and sort of personal responsibility, all of those kinds of things have to be built. People are talking about grit and tenacity and all of these wonderful words that are coming up. We need really, as we're looking at this, to slice through, if you can sort of think about the image of a pipeline, we clearly want young people staying in the education system and moving through, ideally through post-secondary and into the workforce, although we know those things often happen together. But around that pipeline are this array of normative social supports, which are offered by the faith community, by youth organizations, by employers offering summer jobs and part-time jobs, by after-school programs. All of those things have to be looked at, and those folks have to be at the table, as well as those basic services that really tie it together: transportation, housing, social services, and health. And as we look at, and Bridge was talking about the reasons and the barriers why young people are saying they ended up disconnecting, more often than not, those reasons have to do with the fact that school was not engaging them and other things were pulling them away or making it very difficult for them to get back. And the reconnection steps were steps that were often taken to make sure that they could solve the personal things in their lives that allowed them to come back. So we really do need to be looking at this holistically, both in terms of making sure that the skills young people are building are not just academic and vocational skills, but social and civic skills, and that they're learning to manage risky behaviors and risky circumstances, and that then the systems and the settings where young people spend their time, morning to night, are also at the table in these partnerships.
I just want to jump in real quickly. The report says, and I think it's right, that historically employer connections to youth programs has been more symbolic than substantive. And that can't happen here, not if we're going to solve this problem. Talking about two generation solutions, and Mark's wonderful comments about context, there isn't an employer in the country for whom their employees just work. They always work in a context. They come from a place, they have families, they have lives. Those lives and families impact their jobs. For employers, there's a strong case to be made that stable employees with all the soft skills that we've studied over and over, are every bit as critical as the harder stuff. those workers come to that job, and whether or not they're productive, whether or not that company makes money, in other words, is dependent on how stable those employees are, how well and positive those connections to the community are. That has to be part of the puzzle. It's one of the reasons why employers are increasingly working with programs like Strive. It's one reason why employers are casting about for solutions like PG&Es. You may not know this, but employers spend more on training and education every year than the 2-year and 4-year college systems combined. They're not excited about it. They'd much rather people came full-blown out of the education system, ready to work, preferably with happy dispositions and all the rest. But the fact of the matter is, like the frog in the slowly boiling water, this is where they find themselves. They're slowly starting to apply the same efficiencies that they do everything else with to their training and education efforts. And we're seeing that play out in terms of what works and what doesn't, in terms of connections to the education system, in terms of individual training programs. Those same business drivers which got them into training get them into connections to communities. And as we're thinking about investments, as we're thinking about partnerships, thinking about why that business is at the table with you. Maybe it's a CSR reason. Maybe they're thinking about their community relations. Maybe they're just thinking about having enough workers to fill the orders that they know are just over the horizon. Whatever the reason is, there's a driver there for them. And ensuring that the programs, as Karen talked about, as you design these programs to work together and fit together, ensuring that they meet both the needs of the opportunity disconnected youth and the businesses at the table who are going to employ them. I think that's critical to the end result that we're looking for.
And if I could say one last thing, and then I am going to have to go. And again, I just want to say thank you to Casey for inviting me to be here today. I think as we're doing all this important work to sort of educate and inform stakeholders, especially those that we need much more of their engagement in the solutions, I think it's also really important that we're going to have to think very carefully about how to educate the broad public. Because if we actually want to really push hard on this issue, we're going to have to do broad public awareness, broad issue awareness. Most of the public, in my own mind, I haven't done the study on this, is more willing to discount and want to write off this group of very important young people that we're talking about, the people that deserve and we have to make sure have an opportunity to really put their lives on a path. Like so many other issues, we have so many other things going on in our lives. If we don't actually figure out how to put this and make it front and center, it'll be much more difficult for us to make the kind of change we have to see on the ground. So, your comment about the partnership with Ad Council, maybe even Amy's participation here, is a signal that leveraging the media in smarter ways is going to be really critical to all of this as we move forward. I would just say that I see what public broadcasting and public media is doing right now with respect to high school graduation and the important kinds of leverage that communities are getting in elevating the conversation on the importance of making sure kids actually finish high school, college, and career ready. I think we can't ignore opportunity youth in this conversation as well. And so continuing to explore media partnerships, elevating the issue, building the awareness of it is going to be critical both to programmatic change as well as the policy change down the road. So thank you all for allowing me to be here today, and I'm going to have to hop off and leave. So
Thanks very much. Well, maybe I could say something about branding that might be controversial here in terms of getting your message out. When you say opportunity youth, it requires a second line of text to describe what you mean by that. Disconnected youth, I think I know what that means almost right off the bat. And I understand wanting to phrase this in a more positive light. But can you talk about sort of how you are trying to get this message out and the ways that you're attempting to use language to get the public talking, and whether using a negative term might actually be more helpful in getting people to understand what it is you're talking about?
I think we need both, and we had this conversation at the White House Council for Community Solutions. A disconnected youth sends the message that there are millions of young people who are not succeeding through, I think the purpose of education is to educate people to live well in their times, and that literally millions of people are not having that opportunity, not just to get a job, but to participate in the civic lives of the community. Bob Putnam and I did some research that showed that those who drop out of high school disproportionately don't vote, they don't volunteer, they don't participate in the civic lives of their communities. So fostering this sort of intergenerational disconnectedness and lack of social capital that we know is so important to making those connections, getting those supports, and eventually connecting to school and work. At the same time, though, as we listen to the voices of people all across the United States who told us their stories, told us their barriers, expressed their hope, and then indicated their pathways forward, we felt as though, to Stacy's point, if we only talk about disconnected youth, you're going to get a culture of basically writing people off. And we had to articulate the balance of, this is a generation of potential. And there's probably better branding. Somebody in the room will have a better idea. But I think we need that balance of talking about both.
And to build off of that, I mean, that is one of the objectives that we see for the Aspen Forum, that first plank that I talked about, which is education and awareness for the broader public, and the very kinds of partnerships that Stacy was articulating are the very kinds of partnerships that we're working to build and develop now, so that we have this conversation with the public, that they understand what the challenges and the opportunities are, that they understand and they can put a human face and a set of circumstances around the people that we're talking about, so that they don't become flat, one or two dimensional, but instead they understand what's happening and why, and what can be done, and what the outcome has been, and what the outcome has already been in our communities and for families. So we are embarking on that, and that's something that we consider to be critical to our work.
We worry about a lot about language at Corporate Voices. We sometimes say that we've got 5 seconds to catch a corporate executive's attention, and we've got to use those 5 seconds as effectively as we can. And I think you're right, the disconnected youth is more evocative than opportunity youth. At the very least, people think they know what you mean when you say it. And I think that's part of the problem with disconnected youth. Part of the challenge we face is to shift the reaction that people have when they hear the term disconnected youth from, hey, okay, that kid screwed up, right? Or that kid, we're not going to hire him, or what have you, to we have failed that child, we have failed that youth. The responsibility for educating the next generation of workers lies on all of us. With the numbers we're talking about, if 6.5 million have dropped out of the system, that means something is fundamentally wrong with the system. There's not something wrong with those 6.5 million people. And part of our challenge when we're thinking about communicating this out to the business sector and to all the sectors is to think about, I think, how we shift the reaction people have when they hear the term disconnected youth, and the responsibility that they feel when they think about the problem and talk about solutions to it.
I think we just have a few more minutes, so Mark, this may be the last thing we hear, but...
Well, I didn't want to claim that.
No.
Claim that. Thanks, Mel. I just wanted to quickly respond to that and to add that I think that opportunity youth as a term creates the possibility of some connection to the larger issues around youth employment and education, that these issues are most extreme, clearly, among the 6.5 million, but I think that they are part of a larger issue around young people in this country, and that we can benefit from this being seen as part of a continuum that is really important for all of us. It's not about, quote unquote, those people, it's really about us, and I think that in that context there's a chance to embrace some of the things we've been talking about in ways that they are, when they're positioned as being over there and disconnected, it creates a very different and sort of a wall between them, which I think is not reflecting reality.
Mm-hmm. I think, should we go ahead and open this up to Q&A from the audience? So we have about 10 minutes for questions, and I'll try to be fair geographically. Go ahead. Oh, yes, and we have a microphone, so.
Thank you. Megan Trace at United Way Worldwide. As we approach a new Congress, we know a lot of attention will be on sequestration, fiscal cliff, tax reform. I'm just curious if this panel could speak to opportunities we might have to scale some of these successful programs, what vehicles we may be able to act on or mobilize around to scale and to align the supports for opportunity youth.
I'll take that. That's a very large question. One of the things that gave me hope when I was on the White House Council for Community Solutions, I was asked to review federal programs affecting disconnected youth, and reached out to Linda and others in the audience to get insight. But one of the kind of breakthrough moments was this memo from Thaddeus Ferber. I don't know where Thaddeus is.
He's in a room somewhere.
Yes, but anyway, he basically led to these pilot partnerships in 12 communities where the federal government would take existing resources and tear down the barriers to eligibility and use of funds, governance structures, accountability. And I think, you know, particularly given Mel's work and the work we saw in communities across the country, just the federal government rationalizing a system that enables you to treat young people holistically in terms of providing supports, I think would be a little bit of a breakthrough for government. The second thing we discovered was youth opportunity grants. Then under the New Market Initiative, and I think Gene Sperling was behind it, so we actually talked to Gene about it again. It seeded support in 36 communities, urban, rural, tribal, where disconnected youth, opportunity youth, were disproportionately found. And it actually fostered community-based collaboration of the kind that Karen and others and Mel have been talking about. And then there was an independent evaluation from the Department of Labor showing that it actually boosted employment for disconnected youth, particularly among minority youth. And as you saw Patrick and Bob's presentation, we see how important that is. So I think in this new era of the fiscal cliff and evidence-based policymaking, if we could go to the Congress and say, remove the barriers first from in the federal government to communities collaborating. Second, scale up programs that have been proven to be effective. And then third, programs like Youth Build and Europe that have these elements of not just a job, but they build in service and community participation and reconnection to education, scaling up those programs and making the case that that's a great return on investment in terms of these enormous economic costs that Columbia has highlighted.
Just a friendly amendment, we can leverage also what's in the field. I mean, it goes to a lot of what Bridge was saying. This idea of setting big goals and having programs that roll up their goals using metrics and data to try and reach that singular goal, programs continue to work on in their areas of expertise, but if they're working towards a single set of big goals and think about how to coordinate across those bridges and across those silos, you can better leverage the resources that already exist in addition to doing the kinds of things that Bridge was just talking about.
John, did you have something you wanted to add
very quickly?
Yeah.
We are very interested in finding ways, even in the current budget situation, to think about ways to incentivize pathways, building on work that's done on the community level, pathways that opportunity youth, disconnected youth can follow to work, school, and eventually success in life. And we were talking about language a second ago. You know, sequestration for me sounds like it's a real neutral kind of almost medical term, right? You know, your doctor's sequestered your tumor or something. Hey, that's great. This is a disinvestment, right? And at this point in time, with all these young people that need our assistance and need our help if they're going to be successful, to talk about disinvesting really strikes me as the wrong direction.
Question from over here. Go ahead.
Good morning, Stephanie Krause with Shearwater Education Foundation. At Shearwater, we're spending a lot of time living in and thinking about the intersection between education and youth development when it comes to this work. So I'm wondering from the panel, there was talk about the intersection between business and youth development, and then there were lots of references to credentials, educational credentials. Where you see the gaps and opportunities in that intersection, so pulling the very best from education reform efforts right now, and some of the quality education work, and then what we're learning on the youth development side.
So the question is, where do we see the gaps?
Gaps and opportunities.
Gaps and opportunities. Well, I think one place where we both see gaps and opportunities that we could address pretty quickly is in really redefining what readiness or success looks like. In getting an agreed upon list of competencies that all young people, but certainly opportunity youth, but all young people really need to be able to have in order to be ready for college, work, and life by 21, by 24, by 26. But right now, we bounce back and forth between looking heavily at academic competence or at a degree as the marker that you're successful, whereas when you looked at the Corporate Voices study, what was clear was that 40% of the high school graduates that showed up at employers' doors were deemed unemployable by the employers. And it wasn't until you got up into having people who had a 4-year degree that employers felt they had the confidence that they were going to get the teamwork, the work ethic, the productivity, the problem-solving skills, the communication skills that they were looking for. So really beginning to name those competencies, be clear about what it takes to get those competencies, whether you're getting them sitting in a seat in a classroom, or you're getting them on the job at work, or you're getting them in a youth program, would go a long way towards helping us really sort of retool and provide more pathways for reconnection, because we can now be giving young people credit for the competencies that they're learning wherever they're learning them.
And I think specifically building on, I hope I'm building on what Karen was saying, the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, as well as the Perkins Blueprint that the administration put out last year, was it last year or earlier this year, and focus on career and technical education, are two very specific opportunities to think about what we're doing here and make sure that it gets done correctly. There are areas where the president has committed to, and I know that he is committed to not only resourcing but reforming to get them right. And there are places where we can think about innovation and think about everything we've been talking about, everything that you all have been doing in the field for so long, to make sure that we're putting that in place in terms of federal policy, but also that it's that vertical line we've been talking about, and that it connects to what's happening on a state and local level, and doing it in a new and thoughtful way. We've thought about career and technical education for too long as the old voc ed, it doesn't work, you know, we're tracking kids, et cetera. But it should tie into a college and career ready goal that had already been articulated, so that we can make sure that every student has the kinds of skills that they need to get whatever kind of post-secondary credential is necessary, whether it's 2-year, 4-year, or some kind of certification, and that they're ready coming out of high school to be able to move into one of those tracks. And there's smart and innovative ways to do that. Early college, high school, there are really smart things that are out there. Let's build those into the systems while we're having this policy conversation right now.
I think we have time for one more question, so I'd love to take one from over. How about you right here? And then we'll move on over there.
Here, up you pass the mic down to him.
My name is Jesse Sandel. I'm a Europe student. And my question is, until you see youth as a solution, what changes would you recommend to make higher education better, whether that be four-year institution or a community college?
I just a very strongly friendly amendment. Mel and I have been working on career and technical education. Feel like the country's kind of missed the boat in terms of calling it enterprising pathways, and then because I think we're going to need solutions that have a lot of policy punch in this environment. And so imagine a system where 18 and 19-year-olds are getting not only a high school degree, but a 1- or 2-year degree that has currency in the labor market. And then in turn have relationships and partnerships and apprenticeships with local employers who are ready to hire them. Mel and I think that, one, it addresses the high school dropout epidemic because people are in school and they see why they're in school and that it's going to lead to a career. 2, it addresses the college affordability issue because you graduate in 1 or 2 years with a degree and a credential that has, again, strength in the labor market. And 3rd, it gets to John's point in terms of employers getting all these employees who aren't ready, and the training and the remediation that has to occur to get them skilled up. And so we feel like, you know, Perkins is only 1% of the career and technical education budget, but it's a little bit like David and Goliath. And if you were to reform the system in a way that would send this strike, you know, across the transom, you could envision all these partnerships emerging with employers, community colleges, and secondary schools like the IBM P-Tech model, iBest, and others around the country that are really accelerating this work so that young people themselves are the solution and they're connected to a system that values them as the solution.
And just to add to that, I think that at the end of all that are really good jobs. They are good. They exist today. This is not about 10 years from now. They exist today. And to Mel's earlier point about the sort of the need for reframing, this is not the voc ed of the 1970s. These are high-tech jobs that pay well, that have good benefits, and they're available today.
So 29 million of them, actually.
Right. They're so invaluable, in fact, that companies are working very hard to bring in folks from outside the United States.
Right.
How do we turn that on its head is part of the answer to the question, I think.
Do we have time for one more, or is that?
Yeah, let's do one more.
Let's do one more from this side of the room, because I promised. Okay, how about you over there? Yeah.
You.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Kate O'Sullivan. I'm an independent consultant in workforce development and youth development. And I believe it was Mr. McCarthy who referred to all the research that's been coming out about adolescent brain development. And I think a lot about the 0 to 3 movement and how successful they were in, 15 years ago now, maybe 10, 15 years ago, in the policy arena in terms of really redefining how people understand how important it is to invest in 0 to 3 in preschool because of that brain development. And if that brain development is not happening then, the kids are starting out so far behind. And I wanted to ask you all, I feel like the adolescent brain research that is coming out is so fundamental, and do we have an opportunity here with that as well? I realize this is sort of a wonky question as opposed to maybe more of the PR type of question, but it is true that these young people, their brains are not formulated, and this is a time that is very similar to the 0 to 3 period, and so how can we make that case that this is a critical time for investing?
I'll jump in. It is a wonky question, but we'll try to answer it. I think one of the challenges that we have with the adolescent brain research, as people have tried to figure out how to position it, is that the bottom line of that research essentially says we have to both continue to provide opportunities for stimulation so that the brain is growing and trimming and all those things are happening, but we also have to offer forgiveness. And you don't think about that for a 3-year-old. I mean, obviously, in the 3-year-old's case, it's all about growth and development, and let's make sure they're stimulated, and yes, they broke something, or yes, whatever. That's just a part of it. What we haven't gotten right in messaging the adolescent brain research, especially when we get into 16 and 17-year-olds and all the thorny issues about how they should be tried, should they be tried as juveniles, should they be tried as adults, what do we do in this space? There really are some slippery slopes that we're looking at. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at it. I just don't think we've got the messaging right in terms of the balance. But the bottom line is that what we do know is that if we let young people be idle during these critical periods, a lot of the work that the brain needs to continue to do, we waste those years. And so it's all the more reason for us to really have a fuller definition of competencies, a fuller definition of the places where young people can actually build those competencies, better ways to measure those competencies so that young people are active pruners of their own brains. Just to go back to Jesse's point, this is not, at this point when you're talking about adolescents and young adults, they are not passive. They're not folks that we're doing things to, and the more we're really using that research to help them understand the importance of discipline and engagement and what it can do, the better we'll be.
I think that's right, Karen. And one of I try to agree with you when I can. One of the things I think that's important to add is that the learning, the continuous lifelong learning, doesn't stop at attachment to employment. And that's one of the key reasons why, whether it's a messaging thing, whether it's more research, why eventually highlighting why it's just as important for adolescent brains as it is for 0 to 3 brains, is that once kids have jobs and are in the workplace, they increasingly are going to be called on to year after year, month after month, learn more things which are critical to the success of the enterprise. That's true across sectors, whether you're in manufacturing or in the medical field. And all indications are that's only going to accelerate. So if you're thinking about long-term effects, and for companies that are thinking about 20 years out, it's a real concern if you've got a big chunk of the population that their learning and development has been arrested.
All right, well, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Thank you to the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and to all of you.
Fun. Good to see you. Good to see you as you were here.
Thank you all very much for your thoughtful viewpoints, and it's certainly apparent from the questions that there's a lot of energy and excitement in the room on this topic. As we close, I'd like to thank both our panelists, moderator, and the other speakers we had this morning, Patrick McCarthy, Bob Giloff, Pamela Paulk, and Jameel Alexander. Thank you all. And to the Amplification Project, thank you very much for that video. Before we close, I wanted to note two folks who've been critically involved in developing this report. I'd like to ask Patrice Cromwell and Laura Spear to stand. They're two folks who developed both the They developed the data and the narrative for this report, and so if you have any questions, please speak with them after the event. Again, it has been wonderful having this conversation. I'm excited about the opportunity for collaboration with all the folks in this room and others who are involved in this work. So thank you all very much for being here. Have a great day.